folks, Tim Slade here from the eLearning Designers Academy. Sometimes a career change isn't about rushing to the finish line. It's about giving yourself the space to figure out what's next. And so when I sat down with Juli Lorton, one of my past students from my hands-on cohort and coaching program, we talked about what it looks like to press pause and to explore and to let a new path take shape naturally. Now, Juli spent almost 30 years in education, first as a teacher and then as an instructional technology specialist, helping other educators use digital tools in the classroom. And when she and her husband moved from Seattle to Bend, Oregon, she found herself asking, who am I now? And what does my next chapter look like? And instead of trying to force the perfect job right away, Juli focused on learning and practicing new skills and building real relationships. And that approach, paired with curiosity and openness to feedback, eventually led her to instructional design work at Les Schwab, where she's solving real business problems and helping employees perform better on the job. And so in this conversation, we talk about the identity shift from being an educator to becoming a corporate learning professional and instructional designer. We talk about how embracing feedback can help you grow faster and why small and intentional networking steps, things as simple as coffee chats, can create big opportunities over time. So if you've ever felt unsure about the timing of your own transition or pressure to have it all figured out right now, Juli's story will remind you that progress doesn't have to be rushed in order for it to be meaningful. Now, before we jump in, if you haven't done this already, make sure to hit that like, subscribe, and bell button so that you don't miss future videos like this one. And of course, join us inside the eLearning Designers Academy at elearningacademy.io or with the link down in the description, where we help new instructional designers and e-learning developers grow their careers by focusing on skills first. Otherwise, enjoy the conversation with Juli. So welcome, Juli. So happy to have you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I know. I feel like we go back a long time now already. You know what I mean? Like, how long have we gone? Has it been 2 years
Almost
almost?
2 years. I think we chatted in October of 23.
Okay.
I was looking ahead, and I think I officially started in the November cohort.
Of 23. That feels like a lifetime ago, but I feel like I have no sense of time since the pandemic. You know what I mean? So
I lived in Seattle at the time. I had my same, not Walmart flower behind me. But I now have moved since that time, and I have new job.
I know. It's a lot has changed. I was talking with a friend last night that I worked with at GoDaddy, and we were talking about when she started and when I started, and I was like, oh yeah, she started in 2015, I started in 2016, and then it just dawned on me that that'll be 10 years ago next year, which is just crazy. So time flies. So for everyone's context, Juli is somebody who, I've had the pleasure of working with and coaching and mentoring and being friends with for the past 2 years. And as Juli alluded to, she joined our cohort program 2 years ago and steadily worked through it, along with taking pauses along the way for family stuff because you were in the middle of a big move. And today you're now doing actual instructional design and development work. And so do you want to tell everybody a little bit about your background, and then we'll kind of go from there? Yeah.
So I started my career as a middle school teacher way back when. And after about 7 years, I was getting encouragement at that time to be a principal, but I really wasn't interested in being a principal. But it prompted me to think about, what do I care about? What do I enjoy doing? And I had been using technology with students. I was the first teacher in my building to get to use internet, which was pretty cool, with my students. So I became what then was called an instructional technology specialist. And I remember reading the job description, and I was so excited because at that time there was tech support and there was curriculum specialists, and I was a generalist. So I didn't really fit in either one of those, and I didn't want to do tech support, but I loved using technology with students, and I loved teaching others how to do that. So that launched me into 23 years of working alongside all the adults in the system of a K-12 system, learning about technology. And I love that job. But in 2023, my husband and I, actually during COVID, we were here in Bend, Oregon, which is right in the middle of the state. We were here for 7 months living with my mom while our house in Seattle was being remodeled. And we'd drive back to Seattle, and it was pouring rain and lots of traffic. And he'd look at me and say, Bend is pretty sweet. And so it turns out that the house near my mom became available, and I was coming up on 30 years in K-12, which is sort of a magic number when it comes to retirement and those kinds of things. But I wasn't ready to be done with work. And so I started that journey of what's next. I decided, I'm ready to do something different. I've loved my time in education. The cool thing about my job as a digital learning specialist was that every year was different because our job was funded by the technology levy. So whatever the technology paid for, the levy paid for, that's what our job focus was. So we were rolling out laptops, we were doing grade books, we were doing all sorts of things. So I loved my job, and I wasn't running away from education, but it just felt like that chapter was ending. I was moving to Oregon. If I wanted to teach, I would have had to get a certificate here and take the test. I just decided, maybe there's something else out there. So I actually started with project management. I did a 5-week kind of intro survey course at the University of Washington, and I got to the end of it and thought, I think I could do that. But it actually feels like one of the reasons I didn't become a principal, which was managing other people's work. And what I realized at that time is that I love being an individual contributor. I like making stuff and delivering stuff and solving problems. And so I thought, I don't think I want to do project management. So then it was, okay, what else? And so I wish I could remember exactly how I landed on this podcast, but one of them was 10 reasons you would be that instructional design might be a good fit. And I really did laugh out loud. I said that in my student story, and it's true. It was sort of one of those moments when you think, wait a minute, that's me. The technology piece drew me in. I've always been learning software, but learning has been part of my career from the beginning. It actually was when I was in middle school. I was a babysitter, and I was leading, things at my church. And in fact, in my high school yearbook, there's a picture of me next to a chalkboard, and I thought I was going to teach French and math. So being a teacher is part of, I think, my DNA.
So do you, if you don't mind me interrupting, I'm curious to hear, I think one of the things I know I learned earlier in my career, and I don't think this always translates to people who are coming out of education, because, education, I think the thing that I've heard so many times before from educators is they view it as, it's like a commitment. It's like a calling, and, for a lot of teachers, or educators or people who work in education, their sense of their career and their job get like really intertwined, and their identity from being a professional is tied up with the subject they teach, or the classroom they teach in, or the school district, or the school, or whatever. And in the private sector, outside of at the public sector or outside of education, it's not like that. A job is a temporary pit stop. And you're there in a period of time, and then eventually you move on, or things get reorganized and reshuffled, and you might end up in a different job, or you might move on. And there's this very much this like sense of a ebb and flow. And so did you, when you were leaving Seattle and going to Bend, did you view what you wanted to do next as the end of a career and starting a new one, like you were starting over? Or were you trying to figure out how to evolve what you had already built upon? Does it make sense as I'm asking that?
Yeah, and actually, as you say that, I remember hearing, I don't remember where, but the notion of, you don't say I teach, you say I am a teacher. And that notion of that identity is very much wrapped up. And I would absolutely say it was a calling for me. I just knew it. When I went to apply for colleges, I looked for a place that had a really solid instruction and a teaching career. But for me, I think it was a natural, because we were moving states, and because I hit that 30-year mark, and I'm a planner. And so it was, it was 2 years in advance. And I thought, we're empty nesters. I'm ready for a new challenge, but it still needs to be around walking alongside people, learning something new.
Yeah. Can you tell everybody about how much of a planner you are? This didn't make it into the video, but you told a story about Excel spreadsheets in your wedding.
Yes, we were very much teased. In fact, in our wedding album, our photographer took a picture of our Excel spreadsheet. But we had people coming in from all the different states. And so you could look and see, who are you and where do you need to be? And there was an X if you were required to be there. So as much as people teased us about it, they actually said, this was really helpful because
Yeah.
I could look at it and know exactly where I needed to be. That's kind of why I went down the project management path. But I realized I want to work with people in the learning space.
Yeah.
So I would say I was ready for that shift. And I think when I talk to teachers who are leaving the classroom, I am very clear about the fact that I was not leaving the classroom. Teaching is incredibly difficult work. It's exhausting. And even after COVID, I think it's been more exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
And so my job was beautiful. It really was a fabulous job because it followed the teacher calendar. And I was working with people in the central office and principals. And then I also adopted a classroom. So I was teaching robotics to fifth graders. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have the level of stress. I didn't have the grading. I didn't have the parent conferences that I think really can zap teachers.
Yeah.
I want to be open about that fact. But I absolutely resonate with the idea of a calling.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was, all right, it's a new chapter. It's still about teaching and learning, but in a very different place. Because right now I'm thinking about sort of 18 to 22-year-olds working at a tire shop.
Right.
Fundamentally different. Actually, has some interesting comparisons to teaching middle school. But it still is about helping people thrive through learning.
Yeah.
That's something I love to do.
Well, I think too, let me ask you this and I'll tell you why I'm asking it. Are you still an educator?
Absolutely.
Yeah. See, that's the thing, right? So I think a lot of teachers, when they're leaving or thinking about leaving teaching, whether it's to whatever their direction is going to be, it's like, I think a lot of them are mourning this thing that they think, oh, I've given up, I've failed, I'm leaving this thing, I'm abandoning something. When in reality, no, you're just, it's evolution of your career. It's a normal thing to not do the same thing forever and ever and ever. And whether it's instructional design or what you're doing as, doing learning technology or e-learning development, you're still an educator. It's just a different context, a different set of students, a different type of classroom, if you will. You know what I mean? So you're really not you're not leaving teaching. You're still continuing being an educator. It's just different.
You're changing. Your audience is changing.
Yeah.
And I would say one of the biggest differences that I found is that in my experience, I was becoming the subject matter expert because my job was to learn a new technology very quickly and pivot in order to be able to teach others. So I was delivering the training, was designing it, I was learning whatever the content was, so becoming the subject matter expert as much as I could. Then I was designing the content and I was delivering it. And I had an interesting moment, sort of, I would say 2/3 of the way through my time with you, where there was a job out there that was with the website development company that we had worked with my very last year. I led the domain transfer from one web provider to another. And I remember working with their customer, I forget what the title was, support specialist, something like that. But her job was to come walk alongside districts as they were moving into this new platform. And I was thinking, I think I would love that job because I like the technology. I knew the website, and client support specialist, that was the title. And I had this sort of moment of, but wait a minute, I'm following instructional design. What do I do? Because I have these interests in both places, and the job that I had in the school district gave me opportunities to do all of that, which was one of the things I loved, was that I could sort of dabble in these, Swiss Army knife kind of work. But that door sort of closed, and I'm very much a person, and I think my faith informs this, is that if that door closes, then I'm going to keep moving forward until another one opens. And while I am a teacher, that's not my complete identity, because there is that separation of my life is bigger than my job. And I think I've always had that perspective.
And your career is bigger than just that classroom you were in or the school district you worked for. You know what I mean? Right?
Absolutely.
So I don't want to spend too much time talking about your time in the cohort, because we have the student story. I shared that. You can all check that out in the chat. I shared that. If you scroll up, you'll see a little bit of that. But one of the things, as I think about the time that I worked with you in the program, one of the things that I really, really appreciated was that you didn't try to force any particular outcome for your career. I mean, you really just allowed yourself to experience what you were learning, what you were putting into practice. You allowed yourself to receive whoever entered into your, that sounds so woo-woo when I say it, but whoever entered into your purview or your sphere, and you allowed things to unfold in a way that wasn't contrived. And I think, that's very, in my experience, it's very atypical from what I think a lot of other people transitioning into this industry or transitioning out of education put themselves through. I see people who have this like very frantic or energy to make something happen within a certain time frame. It has to be this job title, and has to have this salary, or it has to be this way, and it has to happen in this time frame. And I have found that the more people try to contrive an outcome for themselves and their career and their goals, the less likely they are to achieve it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because I think they end up ultimately blinding themselves to other opportunities that might be made available to them, right? I don't know what I want to ask you with that, but tell me a little bit about or tell the group a little bit about what allowed you to move through not just the cohort, but this pivot with such a calm energy.
Yeah. Well, I think I want to be really open with the fact that I am the second salary in the household. And so I think it's important to know, if I was still a single woman, which I was until my mid-30s, I probably would have had a different perspective on the job switch. So that definitely gave me some, the ability to stay calm. But again, I also trust that, doors are going to open and close as they're supposed to. They talk about hindsight being 20/20, and I think it's important to know there's a reason for that. Things are happening for a reason. But I'll just tell a little bit about how I landed in Les Schwab. So I had never done LinkedIn before.
Can you real quickly, tell everyone what Les Schwab is? Because when you first, I was like, what is this? It sounds like it's like a fancy French restaurant or something, and it's totally not.
It's not Charles Schwab, which is the investment company. So Les Schwab is a regional tire company that started here in Central Oregon in Prineville, just about 20 minutes away from here, maybe 45 minutes, and has now grown actually all the way. They've got stores now in Minnesota and I think Iowa. So we're growing eastward. And who knew a tire company would be where I would land? But when you hear the story, I think you'll understand why. So I'd never done LinkedIn before. And I'm not one who wants to get on Facebook and collect a lot of likes and grow my, influence. That's just not what drives me. And so I said, all right, Tim, I need some help here because this is a new space for me. And he said, well, if you're going to be moving to Bend, Oregon, why don't you find people doing instructional design in the region? So I went to, I think it was Indeed, and I just did a search, instructional design, Bend, Oregon. And so what came up, and this is, a year and a half before I would be ready to get a job. And what came up was a contract position at Les Schwab. Well, I had been in the Seattle area for 30 years and I knew about this company. And one of the famous things about this company is that they fix your flats for free. So the founder, who was Les Schwab, believed that if you provided that service, they may not be current customers, but that you're going to put your brand in their thinking and they're going to maybe come back later if you do that. And they really do. And so I'd known about the company and they were known for customer service. So I thought, well, they do instructional design. So this was October. And so I went into LinkedIn and into the people section and found the training manager. Her name is Mary Beth. And so I messaged her, that was, I think, October-ish, 2 years ago, maybe November, and said, I'm coming over the Christmas break to Bend. Well, she did not see my email or my message until January. And I just laughed because one of the things Tim continued to tell us was the people doing instructional design are not necessarily on LinkedIn all the time. Yep. Recruiters may be, but actually the people that are, heads down doing the work. And so it didn't bother me that she didn't get back to me until January. I just thought, well, she's doing the work and not living on LinkedIn. And so she said, sorry, I missed it. Reach out when you're here. And so that was what I expected to do. Another job fell in my lap because of a newspaper story that my mom sent me and said, hey, this sounds like you. So I ended up getting a 1-year gig on a contract position that was ending in April or in August. And so she and I ended up meeting for coffee before I started my new job. And I think what was important is that I really was curious to find out about the work at Les Schwab. what does it look like to be an instructional designer there? I wasn't looking for a job at the moment, and so it was a really relaxed conversation. And I actually asked her today, why she said yes to that. And she said, I figured that people who are curious about the industry are worth me spending a half an hour to have a cup of coffee, because who knows, there might be work down the road. Yep. And that was sort of the end of that first conversation, was when you're done with this job, reach out. So a year goes by and I reach it, and I think it was this past April, when I knew my grant funding was coming to an end. I reached out, and we both had vacations. And so we planned a meeting for June. That was, again, I call them a coffee chat, just to sort of check in and see what might be there. Well, it turns out somebody on her team ended up leaving. So they had a job open, and the senior instructional designer happened to be on campus, he works remotely, but he happened to be on campus. And so then we had a coffee chat again, and it was just easy. It was really fun to have conversations. I really enjoyed them. And what people don't know is, in between these times, she had heard about Tim. And I said, well, Tim does on-site workshops. So Tim actually went in December, in between my two coffee chats, and spent 2 days with the team. And you came out of it and said, Julie, it's a healthy team. So that put it on my radar. Because I really wanted to be in a place, I knew I wanted a mentor, because it was a new context. I felt like I was bringing a lot of skills to the table, but I think about it, I know a little bit of French and I know some Spanish, and there's similarities between those two languages, but they're also distinctives. And that's how it felt, was that I want to be in a place where I can grow. I know I'll be a sponge. I know I'll learn quickly. And so when I met her, I felt, and she said, Julie, I read every storyboard. And that to me was gold, because I thought, I want someone who's going to read my storyboard and give me feedback and help me grow. So lo and behold, we went through. And so what was really cool is, by the time we got to the interview process, I'd spent 2 hours with her. And in that second visit, she actually introduced me to her boss and a couple people on the team. So I was feeling hopeful that things would go, but there were 28 people who applied to the position, so it wasn't a guarantee. And they ended up hiring 2 of us, because I was open to contract work. And I told my husband in the middle of the interview process, I said, what my dream is? That they would hire someone else for the full-time position and me for the contract position, because I was worried about vacation, because the teachers out there know, we work our tails off, but we also have a lot of flexibility. I've had a summer vacation my whole life. And that's what happened. And the person that they have hired, Kat, is fabulous. And it's just been really fun to have 2 of us come on at a similar time. And I'm happy as a clam.
That's awesome. It's such a great story. And I think every time I see this time and time again, is I always tell people, like, if you're trying to make a pivot into this industry, or you're trying to get a job, it's not going to happen the way you think it's going to happen. It's not going to happen on the schedule you think it's going to happen. It's going to be the most obscure fluke of a thing that's going to come out of left field, and then it just kind of just happens. You know what I mean? But I think it goes to my point earlier, where I was trying to say, it's been my experience that when people try to make it happen on their terms and their way, it just doesn't work out that way. You know what I mean? And you did a really good job of just allowing yourself to be able to receive whatever was coming your way. You know what I mean? And it turned out how it was supposed to turn out,
Thank you. I like the image of trying to grab sand. That if you have an open palm, you can actually hold a fair amount of sand in your hand. But when you try and grip it, it all goes through your fingers.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about, I would love to hear, because one of the things that you said to me, I think this would have been like 6 months into when you were in the cohort or something, at some point, you had this epiphany, and it's always stuck with me. And I've used it the way you've described it before with other people, is, as you were learning about instructional design and everything, one of the things that you said to me was, you realized, oh, this really isn't any different than what I've been doing before, where it's just a different language. It's just different words for the same thing. Can you talk a little bit about like that for you, and how you came to that understanding and all of that?
So something we talk about a lot in the K-12 space is backwards design. Being really clear about what you want your learners to know and be able to do. We use that language. We use that language with students. What is it that, whether you're working on phonics or whole language or math or whatever it is, and then going backwards from that. Understanding by design is another term that we use. And so that was very familiar to me, that we would start with a needs analysis and we'd start about identifying our learning outcomes. That very familiar territory for teachers. And then walking through, well, what are the experiences that you're going to build in order to make that happen? And I think that where the differences I see is that notion of nice to know versus need to know. And getting really, really clear, often I used to talk about just in time, just in case knowledge. And I think sometimes in school, we spend a lot of time on just in case knowledge. Yes, you need to know it for the test, but in their life, are they actually going to use it tomorrow or next week or next month? Maybe, maybe not. Down the road, we tell them, when am I going to use this algebra? Often students would ask that question. Whereas I think in the corporate space, instructional design space, you're looking at immediate needs. You're thinking about learning gaps. How do I address it? And then there's that challenge of, all right, in an e-learning course, what can I actually accomplish? And it actually made me think about when you learn about classroom management in college, there's only so much you can learn in the classroom. There's a lot that you learn when you've got 30 eighth graders in front of you. And I think about our tire employees and thinking about what can they do in this interactive space on the computer. And then thankfully, they're going to go right from there to actually practice it in the real world. So in some ways, there's benefits for that. What do I need to know in the moment from instructional design? Because hopefully your learners are going to use it right away.
Yeah. Well, and I think the reason I bring that up too is because, as I know you've heard me say before, I think you've quoted this back to me, is I'm always trying to remind people that, you and a lot of the other people I work with, you're all way more qualified and capable in instructional design. You just don't realize it yet. You know what I mean? Maybe it's, we call something a design document, you call it a lesson plan or something like that, right? And it's just understanding, where are these things overlap so that you have confidence understanding what it is, right? But I think, I guess that's my question for you is, as you reflect on your time in the last couple of months that you've been working with Les Schwab, do you feel that you were more qualified and competent than maybe you even realized in this stuff? Does that make sense?
I definitely feel prepared.
Yeah.
And which has been really fun. There's sort of those nerves of starting a new job of, I scanned in and I had my little corporate card, and which actually I did have in the school district too, but it felt different. I think one thing that's very different for us is that there's a detailed review process, partly because there's a lot of safety implications when you're working in a tire store. And so our legal team reviews all of our courses. So what I had maybe, all right, we've got 3 weeks to get people ready for their new website. It's heads down. We're just going to deliver this in 3 weeks because there weren't safety implications for that. And so it feels like maybe the process is a bit more stretched out. Yeah. But it's also, it's going to employees at 600 stores. And so this is much larger. And so I don't feel like an expert, but I feel prepared to learn and perform, if that makes sense. Right. And I'm also on a team, and I'm working for a boss who really values people who are curious and want to learn. One thing she said multiple times is, Julie, I really like your approach to figure it out. And that's always been me. I love jigsaw puzzles. And one of the stories I told her in our coffee chat was when we had to move in COVID to online learning. Yeah. As a digital learning specialist, my job at that time had kind of been a nice to have. And all of a sudden it moved front and center and mission critical. And, so how do you learn how to bring multiple devices into Zoom meeting? I said, well, I have my phone in one room and an iPad in the other room and a laptop over here and my desktop. And I was spotlighting myself. And, I loved that, and it was fun to hear later that just the story I was telling of who I am. It wasn't me trying to perform or try to give the right answer. It was being really clear on here's what I enjoy and here's the way my mind works. And it's a fit for what she values. And it's really great to be in that space.
Do you feel like there was any times, because this is something I experienced and I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. Do you feel like there was any times where in retrospect, you were overcomplicating what it meant to be an instructional designer or work in instructional design? Because I see that a lot where I think people look at the textbook definitions of what instructional design is supposed to be or what the process is supposed to look like, and then create this version of it in their head that is like really way up there and way complicated, when in reality, like what we do mostly day to day is actually really just simple stuff. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Does that, I don't know if that resonates with you or if you've
But yeah, I'm sort
encountered
of
that.
laughing at the project that I chose.
Mm-hmm.
It took a hot minute, as Tim would say, for
Yeah.
me to pick my topic.
Mm.
And I landed on this book from graduate school.
This is the project for your the
The
cohort
project
project.
for the cohort, the
Yeah.
four frames of leadership. And the reason I chose it is, one, that I have a graduate degree in educational leadership. So I felt like that says a little bit about who I am. But
Mm-hmm.
it's a book that I read in the mid 2000s that I actually found incredibly helpful in my work as I just navigated complex systems and competing needs. But I was trying to turn a book into a course.
Yeah.
Really hard, and especially
10 to 15-minute course.
Exactly, and especially in the, I think, is all of this nice to have and not need to have? But it's like, no, but actually having a multi-perspective, being able to switch perspectives in a managerial role, I think is important. But fast forward to today, and the course I'm working out right now is writing on the sidewall. So for brand new employees at a tire, what does it mean? 235/60/R17. Very concrete, what do you need to know? But what's been fun is that educator in me has been asking the questions of, what do they need to know? Do they need to know that the first number is millimeters in the width of the tread? Do they need to know the second number is actually a percentage, which I find very odd? The first number is millimeters. The second number is a percentage. It's actually the percentage of the width of the tire. And the third number is inches. It's this funny example of globalization. But that's me going, but do they really need to know all that? So then I spent some time in the tire store and found out that one of the things that happens is you get a work order and your tires are all on these big racks and people can pull the wrong size tire. It's just wrong by an inch or two or millimeters or something like that. And so getting clear about what is the problem. Well, the problem is paying attention to details and knowing that the size of the tire matters. And so we're creating an interactivity around matching a work order to the sticker that's physically on the tires. That's what they have to do. The number may be a 55 here or a 65, and it matters.
Right.
But what a different challenge than perspectives and decision making for leaders.
Yeah, but even with that course, the one you did for the cohort, I remember one of the things that, and I tried to do this with all of the students who were working on their sample project, is like, we could have just done a course dumping information, explaining the four frames. But one of the things that I remember us having conversations about was, okay, but in what situation would a leader use this information, right? And then that's how the course ultimately turned into, oh, well, maybe it's a new leader taking over a team or a new leader deciding who to promote, right? Like everything had to be very contextual to something that in that case, the hypothetical audience would be doing. Yeah. Same thing is true with what you're doing with the Les Schwab course, right? Like we could just teach them how tires are measured and the width and the size and the thickness and the proportions, but it's not really about that. It's to do it so that we can get the customer the right tire, right? Yeah. Like it's the context behind it, Yeah.
It's fundamentally about safety.
Yeah.
And what was challenging for me was I'd never been in a place where there were conversations about promotions. I'd never been in so I'd never been a manager. And so I relied on you to bring me that context. And whereas in my role as a teacher, I was the expert. So for me, that was that big shift of being able to build a course around content you don't know. And I remember you kept saying, Julie, it's actually helpful if you don't know, because you ask questions and you help simplify. And I have found that to be the case in tires. I have tires on my car, and it was just so funny. After the first week, I'm going and I'm looking at all the numbers on all the tires in the neighborhood. But it's kind of fun to not know.
Well, I think one of the things from my early in my career, when, as many of you know, and if you don't know, I used to catch shoplifters for a living, and then I ended up in a role training others how to catch shoplifters, and then I decided, oh, I'm going to be an e-learning developer and instructional designer. I'm not going to catch shoplifters anymore. And I remember I moved into my very first training role or instructional design role that did not have anything to do with loss prevention. And I
Mhm.
remember having this like freak out moment because I wasn't sure, like, am I good at what I do because I'm my own subject matter expert, or am I good at it because I'm inherently good at it, you know? And what I discovered is that I'm a better instructional designer when I know nothing of the content, because then I get to go through the same transformation I'm helping my learners to go through. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So on to that point, though, you mentioned a couple of things, right? Like not being your own subject matter expert, having to collaborate, having to review content with legal and other subject matter experts. I think that's another area that I've noticed that a lot of educators, that's very foreign to them, because they kind of own their domain, they own that classroom, they don't have somebody. They don't need to go check and get feedback from somebody on every little thing that they write or do. Um, they're their own subject matter expert. And so one of the things that I've tried to do very intentionally in the cohort is design our feedback process not as a way of grading your work, but to emulate what you would experience in a real project in the real world.
Mhm.
And so, can you talk a little bit about how the importance of embracing feedback was, like, really, I think it was very critical for just the quality of your project and the quality of your where you're at today. I don't know. Can you speak a little bit about that with feedback?
Well, I learned that lesson when I went into grad school.
Mm,
And I had an advisor who filled my paper with comments. And I had done really well in school in K-12. And so, and even in undergrad, I was used to getting nice job, good work. That was the kind of feedback I got as a student. And I'll never forget when I got that paper. At first, I kind of went, ugh, it was handwritten. But then I realized he was really stream of consciousness kind of feedback. Things that he liked, questions that came to mind, things I might improve on. And I'll never forget. And he said, Julie, you have to be hungry for feedback if you're going to be successful in grad school.
mm,
And that was such an important lesson for me, because I realized, yeah, I only know this much stuff. And if I welcome in the input and feedback of others, my work is going to be much better. And I
yeah.
think as educators, if we've done well in school, we might be used to that good job. Excuse me.
Mhm.
We don't get evaluated that often as a classroom teacher. A
Right.
couple times a year. There are test scores, but in terms of somebody watching your practice, unless you're in a place where they do what's called lesson study,
Hmm.
we're just used to doing it on our own.
Yeah.
And excuse me.
Yeah. No worries.
And so, absolutely, I learned so much from the feedback that you give others, and I see that in my workplace right now. I'm going to look at storyboards of courses that people have done previously, and I'm reading the feedback, because
Mm,
that to me is where the learning happens. It really is gold.
yeah. Do you, I mean, I don't, unless you've worked in a setting where you've written a storyboard, I also don't know how much people realize how not in a silo you work as an instructional designer. Like, don't be wrong. There's been jobs where I've worked with people who could have cared less what I was doing, and but more often than not, you have to go get feedback from your boss, and they review it multiple times, and then you have to go send it to that SME, and they have to review it several times, and they're going to give you feedback that is out of left field, and they're going to change things at the 11th hour. But every part of the process, from inception to literally up until sometimes hours before you publish the thing, there is somebody making a request of your feedback or a change or an edit, and I think it's just I bring all that up because it's so the feedback part of the process is really where the growth happens. It's not the
Absolutely.
act of writing the storyboard, it's the feedback and taking it and iterating on it is where all the growth occurred.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you're worried about putting yourself out there, I mean, instructional design is a place where you put yourself out there.
Yeah. Well,
You
as
know, and it's sort
Kathleen
of,
always says, it's not a spectator sport.
yeah, for sure. And that's one thing. I know you don't want this about the cohort, but
That's right. Yeah.
my experience, it was so great. You know, I was willing, and I think it's because my identity is bigger than my job or my career, that I'm like, hey, plus I went through grad school and had my work, you know, kind of shredded. So
Mm-hmm.
that was helpful to grow. You know, and so the more you can put yourself in those spaces, whether it's, if you're a teacher, have someone come in and watch your teaching and give you feedback, just to get to that point where you realize feedback is a gift and it's not something that you should fear. I think it's really important that then, and people want to work with people who are hungry for feedback.
Yeah.
You know, if you're trying to protect your work and trying to say, well, that's not the kind of collaboration people are looking for.
No. And it's not the thing too about feedback. I remember the first time I was leading my team at GoDaddy. It was 4 people that I was leading. I remember the first time that each of them worked on a project that I had the opportunity to review, and it was like domino effect. Each person would submit something to me. I gave them feedback, and it became really abundantly clear that there was not a culture of feedback, because it was like I called their babies ugly or something like that, because it just crushed them. And it was through that I had learned that, feedback is not something that most people get in most of their careers or jobs. And so understanding that feedback is not about you, it has nothing to do with you. It's about the
Yeah.
work. It's the thing, you know what I mean? And the success of that thing is bigger than just how that makes you feel personally, or, you put a great idea into it. Okay, cool. If it gets cut, then put it in your back pocket. You're going to use it again next time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're reminding me of my early research was on coaching and looking at people who are, coaching teachers, and we would have consultants come in, and we had one from New York, and it was, she just told it like she saw it. And they use this term called Northwest nice. So our teachers aren't really used to that kind of call like you see it. And I remember the coach I was observing, she said, well, Julie, I usually use a compliment sandwich. So I start with a compliment, and then I give some constructive feedback, and I end with a compliment. And there's something about building rapport and building trust, and, a trusting relationship, you're going to receive feedback better. But it was just a reminder that, it's not necessarily part of the teaching, ethos, if you will, or environment. So I think it's really important. And without my grad school experience, I might be a different person when it comes to feedback.
Really? So, I don't know. If you could go back in time 2 years ago, what advice would you have given yourself?
You're not going to do it in 8 weeks, which you actually said early on, so yep. Full transparency, Julie's plan, and thankfully the plans that don't go well often turn out, better than I had expected. But my plan was, okay, we're going to move this summer. So I think I'll do this cohort. I'll start in November because I've got Thanksgiving break, I've got Christmas break, and I'm really going to power through. And then, I learned that most business people take Christmas off, which is appropriate and good for your mental health.
Yeah.
And then we ended up selling our house sooner than we expected. And it was, my husband had been in the house for 27 years. And so the process of moving states and moving out of a house was much bigger than I had expected. So I think I adapted pretty quickly. But I just laughed that it was sort of, okay. And then this other job came along, and that also threw me. But it was great because I thought, all right, this kind of set me up to do some project management, which felt like a nice boost to my resume. But yeah, I think I don't know if it's still the messaging out there for transitioning teachers that you're going to do it quickly. And, Tim, you're quick to comment about that's unrealistic. But I think it's important to know from the beginning that it's going to take time, and especially if you're working full time. I mean, so that was part of it, is I was working full time, and you realize to do this well takes time. And some people maybe can do it in a summer, but for me it was 2 years, and I'm so glad I didn't push it. I was able to let go of my time. I used to always say that I want a good lesson plan, but I can pitch that plan in the moment when there's a teachable moment and I want to go a different direction.
Yeah.
So I like to have a plan, but I'm willing to toss it. And
Yeah.
I kind of did the same thing here.
Yeah.
And I was
Well,
really glad, I had enrolled in a university certificate program, and I was in, and the first week, my gut just said, you're not going to get what you want.
mm,
And I'm so thankful that I lost a little bit of money. They only gave me 80% of my refund. It was so worth it. I'm glad I didn't just stick with it just because I, spent some money.
yeah. Well, I think, as I know, and people who know me know, I so have little patience for when people say, "Oh, you can make this transition," and then they put any number, because I am telling you all, I have seen people go, I'm going to transition, and then they get a job 3 weeks later in instructional design. I've seen it happen that quickly, and it's just a fluke. And I've seen people take years, and I've seen people recently, the first job they applied for and the first job they interviewed for, they got the job, and there's just no predicting or contriving what it's going to do. And for a lot of people, I don't know, I don't think this was the case for you, Julie, because I think, like I said, you just allowed it to unfold the way it was going to unfold. But I see a lot of people, it doesn't happen until the universe brings them to the point of just about quitting on it. You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden it's handed to you. You know what I mean? So, but I think it's usually at that point people start showing up more authentically as themselves. They stop trying to be something that they're not. I guess that's my other question. I never at any point felt like you were trying to be something that you weren't or create a version of yourself that wasn't true to who Julie was. I don't know if that's just who you are, or I'd love to believe that I said something that made you feel that way. but I don't know what allowed you to approach this and your networking with Mary Beth and others as just Julie.
Well, I think there's something about being in your 50s.
Okay.
Really, I think there's some maturity that comes with, this is who I am. This is what I want. For sure, I have a faith background that gives me grounding in who I am as in terms of my identity. But I trusted you. I really wanted somebody who knew the business, and so I thought, all right. And I watched people in the cohort ahead of me get jobs, and some of them were quickly, some of them were not. It was such a gift to watch Michael and his process from being a priest to going through that. And I think when we watch each other's journeys, we can learn from it, and there's no promise of a job at the end of it. But I really do think, part of that is who I am. I've always been an optimistic person. I've always, my brother used to say, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I'm a hard worker, I'm a workhorse. But I don't expect things. I'm open to what's going to come.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to mess up the saying, and it's been a while since I've said it. I'd have to go look up the slide. I did a keynote last year, and I had the slide for this. It goes hard work and determination and persistence and consistency create events that other people call luck. And I believe that to be true.
Yeah, I think it's preparing yourself, and upskilling. And that's one thing that's been really fun for me, is to see how the threads of my experience have come together in a way I didn't expect. I remember if this is in the story or not, but I did my middle school website back in 1997 with, that was my master's in educational technology. And I used HTML a little bit in my job, but nothing significantly. And then the very last year in the classroom, I wasn't supposed to lead the website domain transfer, but somebody had a personal emergency. And so I had to step up and take it over. And just having that foundation was helpful, and then the job that I had was federally funded, and some of the funding got cut in May. And so I had a 3-week break when they moved me from one university to another. So I had time to dig into building my portfolio, if I was working that time, I probably would have just done an off-the-shelf one. I'm like, I've got a few weeks. Why not? And so I learned JavaScript. And here I am now, because I had been teaching computer science to fifth graders as well, my last 5 years in the classroom. That computer science background prepared me to learn the JavaScript, which has now prepared me to do some really fun interactivity with tires.
Yeah.
And I had no idea back then that I would be using those skills. I know you've written about that recently, but it's really fun to see how that plays out.
Yeah, for everyone's context, I talked about this recently. One of the things that I've noticed in my career, and I've seen this with other people, is the power of compounding and capitalizing on skills that you might have learned previously in ways that you may not have anticipated. And so like there's two things in my very first instructional design job that have been instrumental to everything I do today. Is one, I had to use and learn how to use Adobe InDesign, because we did a lot of print facilitator guides and participant guides. And Adobe InDesign is a complex program. It's like Microsoft Word on all the steroids. And then video production. And I had to go learn how to work with our video production team and go film things and plan things out. And then a few years later, after I'd done that, I worked for a company called Artisan Learning, where I was their creative director of a sister company called eLearning Uncovered. We had books on Articulate Storyline, and I helped co-author a bunch of those. But it was through that experience that I reused my Adobe Illustrator skills, but then also learned, how to publish and market a book. And so like all of those things play into everything I do today, the video production or writing a book or probably, all of those things are compounded, and you couldn't have predicted how I would have used those previously, just like you couldn't have predicted creating robots for fifth graders or whatever, or the JavaScript would have led to how you created your portfolio, or now you're doing vibe coding and crazy stuff all the time. You send me all these emails with all these cool things that you're doing, at Les Schwab. And so I think the lesson that I guess I want people to take away from that is, again, especially for the educators, it's not like you're taking X number of years of a thing that is just now no longer relevant or valuable. Like there are things that you did there that aren't just relevant or transferable, but you'll find critical in whatever you do in the future,
Well, and I think figure out, what are you good at and what do you love doing? And being clear. And it's easy to be confident in those things, and to bring that to a team. And that's been really fun as I get to know the team at Les Schwab. We're different people with different skill sets. And to see how we can work together to sort of shine. I told my manager, I said, you're kind of like a coach deploying her team, figuring out who's good at what and how do we make it work. And that's just fun to see, but you have to figure out, rather than trying to fit somebody else's job description. I think that was something that was important for me when I had that moment of client support specialist or instructional design. It really made me step back and say, what do I want to do? What are my skills? Because when you work in your skill set, it's much easier, and there's always going to be things in our job that we're not very good at. And there's places for us to grow, but to find those places, there's a team that may need that skill set. And if you can find it, I look forward to going to work every day. It's fun. And there's time, I think I've actually said it, I do this for free. Some of the stuff I get to do, and I think because there's just alignment there, which is just, I'm thrilled and I'm really thankful.
Yeah. I think that's what did you say before we got on the call? You said something, that I was going to bring up, but I think it aligns with what you were saying just now. I just think, I think the important lesson in what you're saying is that, I think it's really easy to get caught up when you're trying to make a career pivot, trying to make yourself into somebody else's path or journey or dream or skill set. And I think the success that you've had and the others that I've seen really came through the clarity and the self-reflection and introspection of understanding, well, no, wait, what skill sets do I have? What am I interested in? Because otherwise, I think, this wasn't the case for you, but it's certainly the case for a lot of other, career transitioners, if you're not clear about that, you're just going to end up recreating the thing that you're running away from, because you're going to find yourself, falling into something that maybe isn't really aligned with what you want,
Mhm. And I think about why you went into teaching, and when you did love it, what did you like about it? Because
Hmm.
I understand that teachers who are burned out, because it's hard.
Sure. Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've been in the classroom, but I think most teachers go into the field because they want to be there and they've got skills that align with that profession. And so to
Yeah.
think about what are those skills? And when I hit my stride and I was doing well and I had a fabulous day, what are those things that, brought you joy in the midst of it?
Yeah. Well, good. Well, we have a couple minutes left, so we have some time for some Q&A. We have one question in the Q&A pod, but if anyone else has questions, feel free to throw those in there. Before we get to the questions, I'll share my screen and just share this real quickly. I'll put this in chat. As many of you know, because I've been badgering people with emails, they will stop after this week, I promise. We are running not just our final cohort of the year, but our final cohort. And this is Julie's story. That's not what I wanted to share. Hold on. Let me stop sharing. Let me reshare my screen. Here it is. Yes. So we're going to be running our final cohort. It actually kicks off the week after next. And I'll be sending out the enrollment links to those on the waitlist tomorrow. And so I encourage you all, if you haven't, or if you're interested, feel free to check this out and you can join the waitlist. We have a lot packed in for this final cohort. In addition to learning the instructional design, e-learning development process, all the stuff that Julie talked about, we also include 6 months access to Articulate 360, which is designed to help give people really the breathing room and time to just really learn the tool, build a great quality piece of work. I'm also including, we have a new course that I'm going to be launching in October called our Instructional Design Career Jumpstart. So we'll be including complimentary access to that. And then yesterday, the wonderful folks at Langevin Learning offered up seats to their Enhancing Instructional Design with AI 3-day workshop worth $2,200 for the first 25 people who join us. So feel free to check out that information with the link in chat. Julie went through the program. She's a great testament of not only the great work that we do, but the type of students that I like to work with. So I just wanted to share that. Okay. Let's do some questions. Let me see if I can find where you went. There you are. Okay, so the one question we got here is from Adrian. Adrian wants to know tips for networking when transitioning from higher ed, steadier job, to contract work that allows more location freedom. Feels like a whole new ball game getting back into the job search. I don't know. What tips do you have for networking in general, Julie, from your experience? I can share a bunch too.
Well, at least from watching people in the cohort get jobs, it feels like the willingness to be in person matters. And actually, that's something that I knew from my coffee chats with my new boss. She talked about the value of being in person. And so I think, especially for people who want 100% remote, I think that's just hard, because how do you build that rapport with somebody? It can, because you're competing with the world in some ways. I mean, not really, but within time zones. But I think, just like Tim suggested for me, is to see if you can make connections with people doing the kind of work you're interested in, in the region. And, I chose to be in the office 5 days a week right now, just to build community. Thankfully, it's a 7-minute commute, which still makes me giggle because I'm in a smaller town, which is fabulous. But it is, a whole new ballgame for sure. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing going into the corporate world. And that's where I leaned on Tim and others, even if you're not in the cohort within the community, I think, people are willing to weigh in. And so, be yourself. And it can be hard, I think, to make connections because people are busy. So I'm just grateful that Mary Beth responded to my LinkedIn. But I did have one other person, it was in Texas. I think it was the first message I said on LinkedIn. And she said, "Oh, whoa, a person," which I was kind of surprised by, because I thought, isn't that what this is about? But it makes me think that maybe if you either use AI or use the canned, responses, that people don't pay attention. So, my message to her, I think it was about 3 paragraphs. It was like, here's who I am. This is some of my background. I told her I knew about Photoshop and I'd been a Google admin and that I was taking this cohort. And so I think enough in your communication, not to overwhelm. If it's too long, they won't read it, but to show that you're a real person. And what are you interested in? What's going to pique their interest when they read that message that you send?
Yeah, I think I'll start here with this. Like, it can't be, I just want your advice on transitioning into instructional design. Like, no, that doesn't tell me why are you reaching out to me specifically. That's just, because we get those messages. I get them multiple times a day, and it's just like, ask me something with substance, right? I think that you covered a lot there. One thing I want to say too about the remote work, I don't know a major company right now that doesn't have some sort of return to office initiative at this moment. And so the idea of getting the fully remote work 6-figure job in instructional design is just not a reality like it was during the pandemic. But that wasn't just instructional design. That was just the nature of what we were going through as a society. And so, yeah, a willingness to be in person in some capacity is going to be huge. And it shrinks your pool of competition if you're just looking at your local area. The other thing too, I would add, in addition to everything you said, Julie, is find any method you can to connect and network with people that doesn't involve LinkedIn. As Julie alluded to earlier, and I'll reemphasize this, the people, and I include myself in this bucket. Most of what you see on LinkedIn are talking heads. I'm a talking head, and talking heads aren't the ones doing the work that you want to be working in or working at the jobs that you want to be working at. Why? Because they're busy doing that work. So they're not on LinkedIn all day. And so one way to connect with these people that doesn't involve LinkedIn, because when you are on LinkedIn, it's just, there's more inauthentic connections trying to happen than authentic ones. And so when you do try to authentically connect, it can get lost really quickly. So one thing I would say is, your local ATD chapter is a gold mine of connecting with real working practitioners in your local area. They're volunteer led. They're ran by people who are working in your area, whether it's hiring managers or practitioners, and you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck if you can show up and shake somebody's hand and have a human conversation in person than you will any day sending a bunch of messages on LinkedIn. Yeah. So,
and even, I reached out to the training manager, but even just an instructional designer who's on a team at a company where you might be interested, just to have a foot in the door, and for me, it was genuinely curious about what they did. When you hear about instructional design, it's such a huge field and there's so many different niches within the field. Be genuinely curious. And often people like to talk about what they do.
Yeah, they do. All right, we have another question from Noah. Hey, Noah. Noah wants to know, early on, did you feel there was value in targeting a specific sector, higher ed, corporate governance, or government, or is it more helpful to just be open to the work that's available in your area? I have a take on this, but I'm curious to know, Julie, if you had a take on this. Because I remember you used to talk a lot about having, you used to have a phrase, it's not a career identity crisis, it was, I don't know what you said, so you have to fill it in.
I don't remember because it was my pivot,
Yeah.
But because I'd worked in K-12 and I'd spent a fair amount of time in graduate school and I taught, in the higher ed realm, I was just ready for a change. And so for me, I just thought corporate is brand new. But I wanted something that had, tires aren't exactly a moral purpose, but I wanted a company that I could stand behind what they did. And in my coffee chat with Mary Beth, she said, Julie, fundamentally, we're about keeping people safe on the roads. And I thought, I like that. It's again, I have a servant nature, and that's a way of saying, yeah, this is what this company does. So finding a company that I could stand behind was really important to me. And then again, team and mentor. So I wasn't really specific on the industry. I was more looking at the context in which I wanted to work.
Yeah. I think I'll say two things for Noah's question. First off, you can be as choosy as you can afford to be as choosy. You know what I mean? And I think it's less about choosing a sector or an industry, but the type of work you want to be doing and the type of environment you want to work in. If you're somebody who, if you cannot stand the idea of sitting behind a computer all day, using a program and creating interactions and graphics and visuals, then you maybe don't want to be an e-learning developer. You know what I mean? But if you enjoy interfacing with people a lot, digging into data and research and understanding, maybe then you want to do upfront parts of instructional design. And so you have to get like really, really, really clear on, as Julie was saying earlier, like what are your interests? What are your skill sets? What is the overlap? What type of instructional design work do you want to be doing? Because that's the other thing too, is like my big pet peeve is when people try to like frame instructional design as it fits into this like simple box. And as you know, Julie, like I don't know how big the team is. It's like 10, 12 people. They all do very different parts of the instructional design process, right? But they're all would be considered instructional designers if we were to look at them and line them up,
Yep.
So it's understanding what type of work you want to do and what type of organization do you want to do it in, Yeah. And if you don't know the answer to that, then that means you need to keep doing research and keep learning, Yeah.
And that's where those conversations, those networking conversations that are, that are genuinely curious, not just chasing a job.
Yeah, exactly. Well, good. Thank you so much, Julie. Any like big final word of wisdom that you would send to the world,
Work
or
hard
to the
for the
people
open.
listening? There we go. I like that. Good. Well, thank you so much for joining, Julie, and thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for tonight's conversation. I'm going to go get some dinner.
All right. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone. Have a good night.